thank you very much to the organizers for putting the paper on the program. As you said, I'm Adrien, and this is the geography of unemployment. So the starting point of this paper is that cities differ dramatically in their unemployment rates. Now, to give you an example, you can think of Versailles, which is an affluent city close to Paris in France, where the unemployment rate was about 5% in 2017. And to take an example in the US, the unemployment rate was about comparable in the Boston area in the same year. Now, if you move to the south of France, to Marseille, the unemployment rate was well above 12 to 13% in that same year, 2017. And if you go to Flint, Michigan in the US, it was also of comparable magnitude. But these gaps are not special to 2017 because, in fact, they're highly persistent over time, and they can be found in many developed economies. Now, this dispersion in local unemployment rates is somewhat puzzling because, in principle, both workers and employers could reallocate across space, and they may have important welfare implications. We know from a large body of work that being exposed to unemployment is harmful for workers, but spending a lifetime in a distressed labor market like Marseille in France or Flint in the US could have dire long-run consequences for workers. And at the same time, policymakers seem concerned about spatial unemployment gaps because we see local governments spending billions of dollars every year to attract jobs. At the same time, we know relatively little, but from a positive perspective, what are the determinants of these persistent spatial unemployment gaps? And from a normative perspective, what are the effects of place-based policies that are aimed at mitigating these spatial unemployment gaps? And so in this paper, I tackle three questions. First, why do we see these persistent unemployment differences across locations? Second, what are the welfare implications of this dispersion for workers? And relatedly, in general equilibrium, what can we say about the design of place-based policies that are aimed at high unemployment areas? And so I propose answers to these questions in this paper in 4 parts that I'm going to overview in the rest of the talk. And so in the first part of the paper, I document that the unemployment rate is high in Flint, Michigan in the US, or in Marseille in France, not because workers struggle to find jobs in these cities, as conventional wisdom would suggest. Instead, what the data reveals is that cities like Marseille in France or Flint, Michigan in the US have high unemployment rates because workers repeatedly lose their jobs in these cities. So this is what these two graphs are illustrating. They're based on a very simple accounting models for unemployment rate at the local level. So what you're seeing here on the x-axis is plotted on the x-axis is a transformation of the unemployment rate of every given commuting zone in France. And on the y-axis, you're seeing measures of the rate at which workers lose their jobs in this same commuting zone. And so this is for France because I have good data there, but you can do a similar exercise in the US, and I do in the paper, and you find a similar picture. What does the picture tell us as well? That the data lines up quite closely along the 45-degree line, indicating that differences in job stability across cities and the rate at which workers transition into unemployment are the primary determinant of spatial unemployment differences across space. And you can look at the job finding rate on the right axis, which is how easily do workers re-enter employment from unemployment, and that's essentially flat across locations. Now, of course, the question is whether this localized job instability reflects differences in the type of workers who are present in the city, or differences in the type of employers who are present in this same city. And so to answer that question, what I'm going to do is project job loss at the individual level on a set of worker fixed effects and a set of job fixed effects, where by job fixed effect, I really mean establishment by occupation fixed effects. And so, this two-way fixed effect regression is going to allow me to disentangle the contribution of, the types of workers and the types of employers that are present in every given local labor market. And so what the picture is showing you here is the contribution of, the heterogeneity on each side of the labor market on the y-axis to the local job losing rate plotted on the x-axis. And so you see in blue here that about 1/3 of that spatial heterogeneity in job stability is coming from the fact that workers are inherently different. And so there's some sorting in the economy on the worker side. And so that leads to some differences in job stability across space. But the overwhelming majority of differences in job stability across cities is not coming from the types of workers who reside in particular locations, but instead coming from the type of employers and the type of jobs that they offer in those cities. 2/3 of the cross-sectional variation is coming from heterogeneity on the employer side of the labor market. So that's going to lead me in the second part of the paper to build a theory that can speak to these differences in job stability across cities that are tightly linked to the type of employers that decide to open jobs in particular locations. And so I'm just going to give you a very bird's eye view of the mall in this slide. So it's going to be a macro-funded mall that has many cities, of course. And then within every city or location, more generally, there's going to be a frictional labor market in which workers are unemployed every once in a while. They find jobs, and then sometimes they lose their job. So that will allow us to think about job loss and job finding and unemployment at the local level. Now, the key novel ingredient of this mall is a set of heterogeneous employers that will choose where to open jobs. And so, some employers will be highly productive and offer high productivity jobs. Think of those as, a meat specialist position at the high-end restaurant, whereas other employers will be less productive and offer low productivity jobs. Think of those as a burger flipping position at the McDonald's franchise. Now, of course, all jobs are subject to some idiosyncratic fluctuations. Sometimes workers fight with their managers, so all jobs eventually terminate. But jobs at more productive employers are endogenously more stable in this model. And then employers, of course, choose where to open their jobs. So they're going to look at labor market conditions across space, and they're going to sort on the basis of these labor market conditions for reasons that I'm not going to tell you in detail today in the interest of time. And so because all the highly productive employers will go to some locations and all of the less productive employers will go to others, and this initial link between employer productivity and job stability, this economy is going to deliver endogenously differences in job stability across space. Now, why do we want to write a theory here? Well, because this theory, in fact, uncovers a reason for place-based policies. And so here, the key insight is that the presence of labor market frictions in the economy across and within local labor markets distorts the location decision of employers relative to what a social planner would do. And so this is where I guess this paper connects with the mechanism design theme of the conference. So here we're really comparing, the decentralized equilibrium of this economy to the social planners allocation. And the intuition here is that because of labor market frictions, productive employers overvalue the benefits from co-locating together in the same top labor markets and don't fully internalize the positive spillovers they would have on high unemployment labor markets should they enter there. And what this immediately implies is that place-based policies that subsidize employer entry into high unemployment, high job losing rates labor markets are going to be welfare improving in the aggregate, on top of course, helping the residents that reside in these distressed labor markets. All right, so then, of course, so that's all qualitative at this stage. Then you want to quantify the strength of these effects. And so I'm going to, again, skim very rapidly over the estimation of the mall. It turns out to be block recursive, so you can just run a bunch of reduced form regression equations to very transparently see identification. And then you can compare some key moments that come out of this estimated mall to their counterparts in the data. And so all of these moments are non-targeted, but you can see that the mall does a decent job at matching the standard deviation of local unemployment rates, 2.2 percentage points in the estimated mall, to what it is in this French data that I'm using, 2.3 percentage points. And in fact, about the same share of that variation is coming from the job losing rate in the decentralized equilibrium and in the data. Now, what is quite striking here is that if you then completely remove the inefficiency in the location decision of these employers, unemployment gaps across cities collapse by a factor 5 from this 2.2 percentage points that you can see in the middle column to the 0.4 percentage points on the right column. So this is telling us that the way employers locate their jobs is key in understanding spatial unemployment gaps, and this large reduction also suggests that there's potentially a lot of scope for policy intervention. And so what I show in the paper is that the optimal policy takes the form of corporate tax credits that are implemented in high unemployment areas, and I then quantify the welfare gains from such place-based policies. And so here what you're seeing on the left panel is a plot of the welfare gains in consumption equivalent percent in the cross-section of cities. Here on the x-axis are ranked by their pre-policy unemployment rate. On the y-axis, we have welfare gains in consumption equivalent percent from this quasi-optimal policy, quasi for technical reasons that I described in the paper, that is implementing a high corporate tax subsidy in high unemployment cities. And so that attracts marginally more productive employers with more stable jobs to the cities with high unemployment initially. So you can see that in initially distressed labor market like Marseille in France or Flint, Michigan in the US, you can achieve substantial welfare gains of the order of 20% by moving in at the margin these more productive employers with more stable jobs. Now, of course, residents of the initially top labor markets like Boston in the US are going to lose, because they're going to lose some of these productive jobs that were there initially. So they benefit the residents there, but of course that's not optimal from the social planner's perspective. But on net, the economy still gains here. And on the right panel here, you have the comparison with the real world enterprise zone program that was implemented in France in '96, the zone franche urbaine, that was a lot smaller in scale and scope that the optimal policy I find, but still goes in the right direction. It kind of looks like the optimal policy is just a lot smaller. And so there, the welfare gains are concentrated in the treated locations, really the locations with the highest unemployment rates in the city, and so a little smaller in magnitude. And so you can aggregate these local gains to the local residents through the lens of the structural model to arrive at an aggregate number. And so you get a 5% welfare gain under the optimal policy and a more modest 0.2% under the actual enterprise zone program. And on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for your attention.